Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective collab channel. This week we're talking about visualization. This is a topic that I did a video about a little while ago on my personal channel, which I was inspired to do after I once again met someone in person who told me that they feel like they just can't visualize. So I will link to the video that I did on my personal channel. In that video, I talked about how a lot of the time, the people who come to me and tell me that they don't think they can visualize, after I ask them a few questions, give them a few examples, it usually turns out that they actually are able to visualize in one way or another, but they thought that they couldn't because they thought visualization meant something else. They thought that it had to be more, they thought that it had to be something different. So a lot of the time that I've talked to people about this topic, it seems like it's a misunderstanding of what we mean when we say visualization, and because of the languaging that we use when we talk about it, making people think that they should be experiencing something else. And if we're not experiencing it all exactly like that, then it can make us think that we're not doing it or that we can't do it. However, there has been some new stuff that I learned recently, because since I made that video on my personal channel, which was a few months ago now, sometime late last year, the conversation has come up again. For the sake of their privacy and anonymity, I have not given their names here, but I will say that they are just people that I've met through a mutual person that we support, and being given the opportunity to talk about things has brought about this conversation. And through the tips and personal stories and personal experiences of several other people, I've learned new things. I've learned a lot more about the differences in the way that people may visualize, or different types of things that people can do if they struggle with visualization. I've also learned that there are some people out there in this world who cannot visualize, who literally cannot imagine things or create images in their mind's eye, or who cannot imagine or recall any sort of sensory experience in their own, what we might call the inner landscape. So that is something that I never knew before. I do think that from what I've read, it's a small amount of people that happens to, who literally just can't do it. So I do think that a lot of the time when people talk about this with me, most of the time we are actually able to do it. We just think that we're not doing it because, like I said before, we think that it's something else that we're not able to reach. And so we tell ourselves that we can't do it. But I have learned that there are individuals who cannot, no matter how hard they try. They really genuinely cannot. So with this in mind, and with this whole conversation that I was able to have with different people and different things being brought up, I touched base with the person who initially brought up the question, and I formulated this week's topic based around a lot of the things that we were talking about. So this week's topic, as I wrote it, will be in the description of this video as always, and I'm gonna read it through and just answer it bit by bit. So I started by describing, although the word visualization makes us think only of vision and our sense of sight, the practice of visualization actually involves any and all of our senses, not just sight, but also scent, sound, touch, and even taste. The initial description of visualization as a practice in The Spiral Dance by Starhawk mentions this. It talks about how visualization is actually a practice that involves all of our senses, all of our physical senses, whichever ones we may have, and utilizing them in our inner landscape, as I said before. So taking our physical senses and being able to recreate those sensory experiences with our inner senses is kind of how it's worded. So yeah, with this in mind, the fact that it's not just about eyesight, do you practice this skill or use it in your path? Yes, I do. That's the first question. What do you actually do when you visualize something is the next question. And the follow-up is, do you find that it comes easily to you, or do you struggle with it? I always thought that it was fairly easy for me, although I have practiced it as well. There are some things that I struggle with about it. There are certain things that I struggle to visualize. Other things are easier for me to visualize. But to answer, what do we actually do when you visualize something? I talked about this more in the video that I did on my personal channel, which again, I will link for you in the description of this video, possibly also in the end screen. But what I am doing, I think is perfectly okay to also refer to it as imagining. Sometimes what I'm doing is remembering or recreating a scene that I might not have ever seen before in its entirety, but I may be recreating it from memories of different aspects that are going into that scene. So in my video, I talked about how if the word visualization throws people off, sometimes maybe it can be better explained or just differently explained by saying, we're imagining this, or can you remember a time? Can you think back to a time when you were at this type of place? Whatever. A lot of the time when I visualize, I am closing my physical eyes and I'm just imagining. Sometimes I am visualizing with my eyes open. I do find that more difficult, I will say. But sometimes, you could be focusing on something visually and you are layering things that you are imagining sort of over top of that. And so that is another way that I visualize. So the way that I do it and what I'm actually doing when I'm utilizing the skill of visualization, again, incorporating all of my senses that I have access to, I feel totally comfortable saying imagining. I am imagining seeing something, or I'm imagining what something looks like. I might also be imagining what the weather is like in that place. I might be imagining how that feels on my skin. I might be imagining what the ground under my feet feels like. I'm imagining the sounds in that place, or the sounds of the things that I am looking at in my imagination. I'm imagining the smell. I'm imagining all these things. So yeah, that's what I am doing. Do you find that it comes easily to you, or do you struggle with it? I sort of just answered. And also, moving on from that, the next question is, are certain inner senses easier to use than others? For example, some people may find inner sight difficult, but hear things easily, and so on. Yes, I find that that's true for me. There are some things that I can very easily imagine what they look like, and I can recreate a visual sensory experience in my mind's eye, but there are other things that I can't. And I have always, just throughout my life, noticed that there might be times where other people see things that don't exist on the physical realm. So whether it be spirits or whether it just be energy patterns, some people can pick up on them visually, and I might not be able to see them, but I hear something, or I sense something, which to me is somewhat, it's like touch, because sometimes when I sense something, like if I walk into a space and someone else might see a certain energy pattern flowing through the space, someone might hear something, or someone might have a certain scent come to them that tells them a certain thing. To me, sometimes it comes through a sense, and I relate that to touch because it might make me feel cold, or it might make me feel warm, or I might feel jittery or something like that. So I do relate it to touch, even though it's not always like I felt something brush against me, although sometimes it is. So yes, I find that some of my inner senses, or some of my senses, are stronger in sensing things not in the physical realm, we could say. Next question is, what do your physical eyes see when you visualize something? This is a question that came up specifically within this conversation because, and what I have learned is that even amongst people who can visualize and know that we can visualize, there are many different levels of experience with that. There are many different levels of vividness with that. And so what I see with my physical eyes, what my physical eyes are doing when I'm imagining is, like I said before, if I'm visualizing, rather, which to me is imagining, If I'm visualizing something with my eyes closed, all my physical eyes are seeing is black. Or like in this case, because there's a light on my face, I'm seeing yellow and red and orange and black, like over the dark that is my physical eyes are closed and I'm looking at the inside of my eyelids. I'm seeing the color that comes to me through light also being on my face. If I am doing that and I'm imagining a color, if I'm able to visualize it strongly enough, then my vision becomes that color. But typically, when I am visualizing a scene or something like that, if I am able to do it visually in my mind's eye, it's not as vivid as opening my eyes and looking in the physical realm. What my physical eyes are seeing is still very much black. If anything, it's just sort of looks like a very vague layer of maybe colors or something like that. When I dream, my nighttime dreams are very vivid, and I would say that those are almost as vivid as real life, and that's why sometimes we have dreams that we're like, it felt so real, it looked so real, it seemed so real, that it can be really disorienting when we wake up and find out that it was not happening in our physical reality. Some people believe that if we are able to do that when we dream, then we can work on getting our inner senses while waking to be that same point. For me, they're absolutely nowhere near. And I think that's fine. That's just kind of how I've always felt like it is. So what I've learned, as I mentioned, someone brought up the fact that some people, I think the website says it's like 2% of people cannot create images in their mind's eye, as we call it. And there is a term for that. It's called aphantasia. I'm just guessing on that pronunciation. I know that I've heard the word fantasia. So aphantasia meaning like no imagery, imagining, fantasy, phantasm. These are all words that come from the same root. Anyway, I will link the website in the description as well, because I read over that and they do have a little quiz. It's called the Vividness of Visual Imagery quiz, and it specifically only asks about visual inner sight. So one of the things that we were talking about was that, like I said, sometimes other people see things and I don't, but I can hear them or I can sense them. So the next question in my whole topic written out here is, do you have any tips for others working on this skill? And one of the things that I think, and I think I touched on this in my previous video on my personal channel, one of the things I think makes most sense is if we're trying to do like a guided visualization or a meditation or something like that, and you're asked to visualize something and you can't create a mental image with your mental sight, but maybe you can call up an idea of what something might sound like, what the scene that's being described to you, the sounds that are involved in that. If you're being asked to visualize a trickling stream and you can't call up an image of it, can you think of what that sounds like? Can you imagine the sound of a trickling stream? Can you imagine what that water feels like if you were to put your hands into it? Is it cold? Is it warm? Things like that. How quickly is it running? So what I'm learning, like from this website, is that people with aphantasia cannot do any of those things. They cannot call up an imagined version of any of the senses at all. So I think that if there is even one that we can work with, that we can sort of call up, then my first tip for anyone who is just struggling with the idea of visualization is to go ahead and utilize whatever that sense is that works best for you. So even if, let's say for example, we're going to a guided meditation led by someone else, right? And they're telling you to see things, all right? So like, let's just say for example, me, in my own mind, I know I can't see things. I can't create the visual imagery. So I'm going to ignore that, but I'm going to listen to what they're saying. I'm going to listen to their words. And when they say, see this place, I'm going to tell myself, okay, but let's expand that. What does this place sound like? Let's say, for example, that hearing is the one that I'm really good at. I'm just going to listen to whatever the person is saying, but instead of even trying to make myself see it, make an image of it in my head, I'm just going to try to call up the sounds that might be in that place. If someone says, imagine a sprawling, colorful marketplace, bustling with people, I might not be able to call up that image, but maybe I can hear people shouting, the sounds of carriage wheels rolling across cobblestone, whatever comes to your mind, right? And again, if absolutely nothing comes to your mind, then you may be one of that small percentage of people who really can't do this at all. But if you are able to call up something from any of the senses, then it is likely that you can visualize. You just do it in a different way than a lot of us may have been conditioned to expect. So I think this is actually great for us to know, those of us who might be interested in leading groups through visualization work. I think it's incredibly important that we be aware of the fact that there's this whole range of ways that people experience it, so that if we can remember to guide people through what they might be experiencing with all of those different inner senses. Maybe we don't focus so much on sight all the time. Maybe we remember to prompt people to see if you can hear something, see if you can smell something, see if you can feel the texture of something. That can be something that's really helpful for any of us who are looking to guide others through that work, as well as knowing what works for us personally, if anything at all, can help us to prompt ourselves through that process, even though we might be listening to someone else guide us through a more visually oriented thing. But as I mentioned, there's a quiz on the website, and it's meant to help figure out your specific ability to do visual inner stimuli. And you have to create an account for the website in order to have your final actual results emailed to you. So I did not do that, full disclosure, but I did take the quiz. And even though I didn't get the official results sent to me, I found that just going through taking the quiz and thinking about the things in it, and then they have you rate it on a 5-point scale, helped me to get a little bit more context of what my visualization is like, what I'm doing when I do it, versus what other people say theirs is like. Because to me, like, how are we supposed to know what anyone else is doing when they visualize? We can't see inside someone else's mind's eye unless we do like a Vulcan mind meld, which I don't know about you, but I can't do that. But sometimes if you're working with someone and you are really trying to connect your inner vision, sometimes you can work on seeing the same thing that your friends do. But in that same sense, they might be seeing it more vividly, and I might still be seeing it in the less vivid way that I personally visualize, So I think we still never really know what someone else is seeing when they're visualizing the exact same thing. So this quiz helped me get kind of an idea of that, because it asks you to think of certain things and try to imagine it visually in your mind. And then you rate it, the vividness of your image, on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 being, I absolutely cannot call up any mental image. There is no image. I know that I'm only thinking about the thing. 2 is the image is dim and vague or flat. 3 is that it is moderately clear and lively. A 4 is that your inner image is clear and lively. And then a 5, the top end of the scale, is that your inner vision is as clear and vivid as real seeing in the physical realm. And I thought, because to me, I've only ever visualized the way that I visualize. So to me, I was like, wait a second. People visualize when they're awake as vividly as real seeing? Like, that's a thing that people do? Because how would I ever know, right? How would we know? So I think that this was really helpful, because then it enabled us to kind of talk about where we personally self-report our visualization skills to be. So I'm going to tell you, with a lot of the questions that were in the quiz, I answered a 2 or a 3. Certain things I felt like my ability to form a visual image in my mind were moderately clear and lively. Typically, those were the things that I have a very strong familiarization with through physical observation. So things that it asked me to visualize that I really strongly know what they look like in real life with my physical sight, I was more easily able to create a clear image of them in my mind. Or I interpreted lively to mean like if you're imagining it as a moving scene, not just a static image, but if you're imagining actually seeing something happening or making it move and making elements within the scene interact with each other, if you're successfully able to do that, I interpreted that in my mind as lively. They don't really explain what that means. So yeah, I answered 3 for those things, but I didn't feel comfortable labeling anything of mine as a 4, because like, what is clear and lively, no, that's just not personally what I felt I would attribute to my own inner sight. A lot of the things I marked as a 2, dim and vague, or flat. Specifically, I noticed that those were things that it asks you to visualize that I am not as familiar with what they even look like in real life. Like, I've not observed them closely enough to know what they look like with my physical eyesight in order to recreate it in my inner mind's eye. And that kind of made sense to me. And I think just through that prompt of like asking, is it clear and lively or is it dim and flat? I noticed that a lot of the things that I do normally visualize would fall under dim and flat. And I never really even thought about like, oh, well, what if I can I make it what I would think of as lively? Can I work on this image in my mind? Like, what would I have to visualize in more detail? Do I have to change the camera angle, as it were, of my visualization in order to make it more dynamic and still hold that image in my mind? Or does it have to do with I have to add in the sound and I have to add in the textures and all that kind of thing? So here I am, someone who has always thought I'm pretty good at visualization, and I always just thought most people visualize the same way I visualize. And so like what I did in that video on my personal channel was I was mostly just trying to explain that when we're visualizing something in our mind's eye, we're not supposed to see it physically appear in front of us. Like if I'm visualizing my scrunchie in my hand, we're not supposed to actually then go, oh, and now I see it as though it is really here in my hand. No, when I'm visualizing it, my physical eyes still just see this, but I'm visualizing what I know this object looks like here, and that's it. Like, so it was my impression that a lot of people were getting confused by the fact that we say, can you see this? Can you see this image in your mind? Do you see it? Do you see it? Are you seeing it? And we're asking people, are you seeing? And I think that can be very confusing, because if people are like, no, I don't see anything, then that can be like, oh, I must not be doing it right. Whereas I'm like, well, no, of course you can't see it physically. It's not in the physical realm when or it is, but you know what I mean. We're not actually making it appear in the physical realm. That's not what we're doing by visualizing it. So I was trying to mostly clarify that point, because I've heard a lot of people say to me, I can't visualize. And then if I ask them, well, imagine your favorite food. Can you imagine what it looks like? Can you imagine what it smells like? Do you imagine what it tastes like? Whatever. So if I ask people, can you imagine what your favorite food tastes or smells like? And they're like, well, yeah, I can do that, but I can't see it like on the table in front of me. And I'm like, well, no, of course you can't. It's not, you're not making it physically appear. That's not what visualization is about. So that's what I was concentrating on in my personal channel video. But I feel like through this conversation and all these types of things that we're talking about this week, it's taking it a step further and realizing that that might be the problem for some people. So you might be someone like me who your visualization, whether it's you can't do visual at all, but you can imagine sounds or sense or texture, whatever the case may be, if you can use all 5 inner senses or 2 of them really well. If you can do it at all, even if you're at a 2, then you're probably like me. And I think that's perfectly fine. And I've been successfully doing it that way for years. If, however, you actually cannot do any of that, if I asked you, maybe you can't imagine what it looks like, but can you imagine what it smells like or anything like that? If you can't do any of them in any way, then you might be one of these people who actually has aphantasia. You never know. But I think that most people I've talked to, and again, according to the website, it's like 2% of people who actually have that. So I do think that most of the people who have come to me talking about it over the years, they can do it. They're just expecting that it's all supposed to be at a level 5. Visualization is supposed to be as clear as really seeing things physically in the physical realm in your waking life. And if it's not constantly at a level 5 with every sense, then we must not be able to do it. And so if that is the case for you, I assure you, I am nowhere near a level 5, and I consider myself pretty good at visualization, and I am able to use it effectively in my practice. And I'm hovering at about a level 2 or a level 3, depending on what exactly the thing is that I'm being asked to imagine. So the last questions I put here: for those who struggle, what are other things that can be done instead? Oh, I'm sorry, I should have read that one earlier. I kind of already talked about it. That goes along with tips. Yeah, if you're struggling with one of the inner senses, I would say try to concentrate on one of the others, or all of the others. See which other ones actually work for you. That would be my first tip, is just kind of trying it out, expanding our idea of what visualization is, remembering that it's not just about vision, it's about all sorts of sensory experiences and being able to imagine them with our inner senses. But then the last question is, does struggling with visualization prevent growth in our practice? For me personally, absolutely not. If I'm comfortable sitting here telling you I'm a level 2.5 on this scale, and I don't think that we necessarily have to label ourselves in that way. I know that could actually be not helpful for a lot of people. We might start feeling like, oh, this other person's at a level 5 and I'm only a level 2, I suck and I can't do it and they're better than me. That's not how I see it at all. I see it as just a way to better be able to relate to ourselves and understand that not everyone is doing it the same way that we are. And so maybe, if anything, those people who find that they are consistently at a level 4 or a 5, if they are someone who is leading a visualization exercise for other people, then it's all the more important that they keep in mind a lot of other people might not be seeing at all, but maybe they can hear or smell, whatever. Maybe they can imagine those other senses. So if anything, I think that I am encouraging those people who might find it really easy and really vivid to try to remember to expand the exercises that we're doing to include the different ways that other people are visualizing, and to include the different levels at which people visualize. Nothing on there makes you better or worse than anyone. It might just mean if you're someone who naturally is already able to do these things, then you don't need to work at it as much. And other people might be able to work and improve it. Other people, I've been doing this for years and I'm still right down here, 2 to 3 level of the scale. And again, I think that's fine. It hasn't prevented my growth in my practice whatsoever. I feel comfortable with where my visualization is. I have always felt that I am able to successfully participate in different exercises and things just in my own way. And if I have to focus more on one of the other senses or whatever the case may be, if I have to do the exercise again 3 times before I feel like I really got something out of it, then I do that, whatever. It's just about knowing ourselves and allowing that the way we do it is not the only way to do it. So that's what I've gotten out of this the most. I had no idea that other people were actually able to visualize in a more vivid way than I can. And I also had no idea that there were some people who literally cannot, no matter how hard they might try. So there are some things that I can continue to ask people to try to prompt them to figure out, is it just an issue with inner sight? Maybe you can do these other senses, like I said before. I think this has just given me more tools for my toolbox of when people approach me with this issue, because I do feel like I end up talking about this a lot. People ask me about this a lot. People that I meet out in the world, a lot of the time, they're like, yeah, I've been reading this book, I've been doing these exercises, and it's great and all, but I struggle with the visualization. Now I feel like I have more language to discuss with people what we might actually be experiencing and what, if anything, we may be able to do to tune the exercises that we are doing to the way that we each individually work. And I absolutely will take this into the future anytime that I am leading a visualization of any kind. I'm already thinking of like the times that I lead a grounding meditation. How can I make sure that I am including something that will be useful and helpful for people who may not be able to visualize with any of their senses? How am I including those people? How am I going to include the different senses? Have I been bringing in the scent of the dark, fertile earth enough? That scent of soil and the feel of that wet, loose earth, or further down the hard packed rock and stone. Am I bringing in all of those senses and using this information to improve what I'm able to offer to other people? So that is what I would love for everyone to be able to take out of this, not this is the number that I am on the scale and it's better or worse, because that's not what it means. And please, if that's what you take away from it, I don't know, let's start over, right? like let's go back and talk about this again, because that's not what I hope to convey. But I found it really useful as a tool for understanding, and hopefully I can use that going forward to improve the way that I'm able to help others, and in myself too. Even if you're not in the position of helping others through these type of things, maybe it can help you now understand more where you're coming from and what you may or may not be able to do to improve it, if that's something that you're interested in doing. So by all means, if you have any experiences with struggling with visualization, maybe you have tips of how you've dealt with it. Are you one of the people who focuses on a different sense than inner sight? Something that I am actually really curious about, and I haven't looked up yet, and I don't know quite how to go about looking it up, but I'm sure I will try, Something I'm really curious about is, how does visualization with our inner senses, how is that sort of imagination affected in people who do not have one or more of their physical senses? So, like, I have an easier time visualizing with my inner eye, imagining things that I have seen and observed with my physical vision. But how does that work for individuals who are blind, who do not have eyesight? How does it work for those who are deaf? Are those things that are just not available in the inner senses, or are they? That is something that my personal able-bodied privilege prevents me from knowing through firsthand experience. So that's something that I'm curious about as well. But yeah, so share any experiences that you are willing to share in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching and or listening. I will see you next time, and until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.